Hi, dear Toastmasters, guests, and friends. Welcome to Toastmasters, where leaders are made. Not just leaders, confident leaders, and not just speakers, confident speakers. On our talk show tonight, I have a confident speaker. If you've attended SealCon 2023, this guest was one of the finalists at the division contest. Division C champion. Without any further ado, let me welcome my good friend, prolific speaker, Toastmaster Doug, onto our talk show. Toastmaster Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Vera. Thanks so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for coming on our talk show. Toastmaster Doug, I ask all my guests this first question, your Toastmasters journey. Where did it start? How did it start? Would you like to share about that?
Sure. So my Toastmasters journey actually began outside of District 31 when I first started out of college in the workforce. I'll give a little bit of background. My professional career is in electrical engineering. And so I am an electrical circuit designer. I build sensors for navigation applications. And what that entails is a lot of sitting behind a computer screen and running simulations all day. And as an extroverted person myself, I found that I wasn't interacting with people at all during the day. And I started noticing it in how I communicated. I would start fumbling over my thoughts. I felt I had trouble expressing myself in a coherent way. And at the time, I had a contact who was in Toastmasters in a club where I was living in New Jersey. And so I joined that club, and that was a really great experience. I was a member there for a few years before I moved on, both personally and professionally, to different locales. And when I moved to Boston in 2019, I was certainly looking to maintain that ability to once again speak with more people and exercise that communication muscle, and also just to build a new community in the Boston area. And I fortunately live close enough to Davis Square, where Somerville Toastmasters is headquartered. And we like to joke that there is a sign outside of our meeting location, and that one sign has done more for membership than any VP of PR or VP of membership has done for our club. And like so many other Toastmasters, I was roped in by that sign, and I gave it a try, and I found that I really loved being a part of Toastmasters again. And I particularly loved the community at Somerville Toastmasters. And that is why I chose to join, and really why I continue to stay.
Thank you for sharing that, Toastmaster Doug. Just curious, what is that sign that attracts so many Toastmasters?
It is nothing more than just a sandwich board sign like you'd see outside of a deli. And we have our Somerville Toastmasters meeting information on it. And through the great work of some past officers in Somerville Toastmasters, they've actually added lights to it. So it has a little bit of illumination in our cold and dreary New England winters. And time again, whenever we have guests at Somerville Toastmasters, the first question we always ask them is, what brought you to our club? And it's something like 50 to 60% of them say that sign did it. And don't get me wrong, there's been a number of great outreach efforts on the part of officers, on the part of members, but really they say that advertising pays where it pays to advertise, and the location of that sign right on College Ave is a fine example right there.
Thank you for the hot tip. Dear Toastmasters, if you want more members, as Toastmaster Doug suggested, and as Somerville Toastmasters is doing, have a nice signboard with illumination. Toastmaster Doug, as I move to our next segment, you are a prolific speaker. Every single speech contest, you are there competing. What is the passion behind that? And how do you practice? How do you prepare? Our next speech contest may be next May. Do you start right now? Can you talk about that process?
Sure. I really enjoy participating in the contest, and not just the contest. Speaking for me has always just been a nice hobby because I enjoy getting that mess of thoughts that sound great in my head and taking it through the messy process of translating it from a thought in your head to words that you can speak to other people. And you're probably familiar with how messy and imperfect that process can be. But it's a great opportunity to approach a speech in a different way than I think we normally approach a lot of our speeches. That so many of our speeches at Toastmasters, it's a manual speech where you're maybe giving it once or maybe even just a second time because you got some feedback on it. But when you get to the contest level, something interesting really happens when you have to give that speech. Well, certainly by the time you get to the district contest 4 times for each of the contests. And ideally, as you're practicing it, you're going to be giving it a number of additional times beyond that. And maybe that 10th or 11th time you're giving it, that thought goes off in your head of, oh, this is the weak point of the speech, and I have to work on it. And so the persistence and repetition of giving that speech time and time again, I think is a level of development that we don't always get through some of our other speech projects. And it's just a delight also to participate in the contest, just to see how the best people are doing it. And as you know, Vera, there are many people in this district who are better speakers than I am, as evidenced by the fact that I did not win the district contest. And so the opportunity to see them speak and to learn from them anytime I hit a plateau and I'm not certain where to go with my development, it's just so delightful to watch other speakers speak, to remind us that there's always room for improvement. And it's just like that one little thing that goes, oh, that's a clever technique, or oh, I really like the way they did that. Or when you start seeing the commonalities between the speeches that are generally being rated pretty well, it's good to see that, and it really does help us get better.
Oh, thank you, Toastmaster. Again, by no means your performance was as good as everyone. I personally like. The best part is your speeches are memorable. I still remember your speech where you were working as an intern and something fell up and it fell down. And even your speech this time, Thanksgiving festivals, how important those small things are for your remembering your aunt. That is a beauty of a great speaker. And I definitely want you to keep doing it. And one day, a world champion of public speaking. I see that, but someday
You
it
are
will happen.
you are too kind, Vera. I very much appreciate the fact that the speeches were memorable. That was the ultimate goal. And actually, to me, that's more important than any kind of trophies or anything that goes with it. It's just part of the joy. We really compete against ourselves more than we compete against the other contestants.
That's the spirit, Toastmaster Doug. Now, what are the 2 reasons, Toastmaster Doug, would you say for a guest watching a talk show to consider Toastmasters?
Sure thing. I guess I could always start with the easy answer of there's always room for improvement. And even if you don't necessarily have nerves in front of a room, I always find that when I actually get up in front of a crowd of people, the adrenaline is more energizing than it is paralyzing. And so I actually might not have the typical Toastmasters journey in that regard. But I guess I'll try to take a different slant in this. And there's a book that's on my reading to do. I think he's a Harvard professor by the name of Robert Putnam. Maybe I'm going to get this wrong, so don't fact check me on this. But he has a book called Bowling Alone, about how generally in America right now, there's a declining membership in clubs and organizations. And I love that Toastmasters is kind of going against that tide. When we come to Toastmasters, we socialize and we interact with a group of people whose only common thread is a desire for professional development and personal improvement. And it's not aligned on a religion. It's not aligned on a social or socioeconomic class. And I love the diversity that it brings to us. I love that at Somerville Toastmasters, we have excellent speakers who are retirees, and we have excellent speakers who are still actually undergraduates right now at local colleges, and an environment for all of us to hear each other and really to communicate with each other is just a beautiful thing. It's just a desire, it's just a delight of my own to have that level of exposure to people. And so that's one. I know you asked for two, Vera, but maybe since I was so loquacious on it, you'll let me get by with just one.
Absolutely. And your answer is so strong. Thank you for sharing that, Toastmaster Doug. The diversity, as you rightly said, retirees, millennials, working parents, professionals, all put together a great experience there, Toastmaster Doug. Impact of Toastmasters on your personal life, professional life, any story that you like to share, Toastmaster Doug, on the impact that Toastmaster had?
That's a good question. I I would initially go back to what I started off with as far as a person who is an extrovert by nature and sits behind a computer screen all day. I have certainly noticed that there is a very much a clear demarcation in points of my life when I am not interacting and trying to do more public speaking versus when I am doing those activities. And I noticed just that I think better, which is not only good for me in a professional sense, but in a personal sense, in a social sense. Certainly an impact to Somerville Toastmasters is that our club is not just close and doesn't just interact at our weekly meetings. We interact after the meeting, we interact outside of Toastmasters entirely. And so I'm very fortunate enough to count some of the people who are amongst some of my closer friends in the Boston area from the ranks of Somerville Toastmasters. Those are the things that when I think about Toastmasters and how I express the gratitude for the organization, those are the things that I'm particularly thankful for. And it's also what I tell other guests who are considering joining about the value of Toastmasters above and beyond just the public speaking development aspect.
Amazing point of camaraderie, Toastmaster Doug, the camaraderie that we create within our clubs and grow together. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Now, coming to our fourth segment, the rapid fire round. Are you ready for some fun, Toastmaster Doug?
Let's see how many tabletops we can do in a short period of time, Vera.
Sounds good. A historic leader that inspires you a lot.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
A historic leader that inspires you a lot.
A historic leader that inspires me a lot, and I will admit this is probably not where most people are going to expect me to go, is actually Genghis Khan, or through I think his name was actually pronounced much more like Genghis Khan, but he's a dude that I think got a pretty bad rap as far as how we've remembered him historically compared to who he actually was. And this is a man who actually had a very meritocratic view of government, that the history of the Mongol Empire actually has quite a history of religious tolerance, of promotion of women as leaders, and their success in many ways comes down to thinking differently and innovative about problems. And so we think of this guy as this barbaric, horrible person, but in many ways, he was just smarter and willing to part ways with tradition when the traditions didn't serve him well, and looked for people who were capable. And I find that particularly inspiring, to reject tradition. And you know that I love the idea of tradition from my speech contest this year, but to reject it when it no longer serves us. And I really respect that about him.
Interesting viewpoint, and I like that. Very different. Toastmaster Doug, a historic speech that is very close to your heart, that inspires you a lot.
Ooh, that is another great question. I do love the speeches, and I guess I'll go more with a historical speaker than a particular historical speech, but I do love the speeches of John F. Kennedy. And I love his inaugural address and some of the wordings that he's chosen in that, the power that we have in mankind to save mankind while simultaneously be able to destroy mankind. I thought that was beautiful. Also, his speech in Berlin, the famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. I think his command of language for a man who's at the pinnacle of power, and I'm not certain how much of that was contributed to speech writers, but I think, as we know, the man's an author. He wrote Profiles in Courage, and so he has at least a delivery and a command of language that I really admire.
Thank you for sharing that. Your personal speech. Now, this is really tough because you have some fabulous speeches. Your personal speech, when you've delivered it, when you've written it, you felt you did the best job. Any speech that comes to mind?
I really have a soft spot in my heart for the speech that ended up being part of my humorous speech contest speech. And so for, I guess, the viewers of this channel who haven't noticed this before, my speech was about my freshman year internship working with a sewer inspection and maintenance robotics company. And it doesn't take a lot of, I guess, imagination to think about some of the interesting things that might happen and why, for it being an unpaid internship, why it was such an interesting point in my history. And one of the things that I loved about that speech was I love speeches that really go out on a high note. And I won't repeat the final note of this speech because I know there's a slight little bit of profanity in it. But some of the feedback that I got from audience members is that they thought that last line of the speech was particularly funny and went out on a really good high note. And so I take a lot of pride in that. And that was something that I was happy that I was able to develop that speech.
And you won the speech contest with that speech, right? That year?
I was fortunate enough to go to the district. I did not place the district. Like I said, our district is full of many, many, many talented speakers. And so I was bested. It was definitely a number of very talented people there. And I do not feel begrudged at all because I thought all the speeches were so well given at that contest.
It is such a nice piece that I still remember to the date. I forgot that it was an unpaid internship. That would add more spice to your speech, but thank you for sharing that. Looking at your shelf, I can tell you're a voracious reader. Now, for a voracious reader, can you pick one of your favorite book that you like to recommend to our D31?
That is another great question. What you won't see is that a lot of this shelf is full of my college textbooks that I have a level of nostalgia about, and the financial investment that I put into them and how painful it is to part with that.
Yeah.
I tend to be a much bigger nonfiction reader than fiction reader. And I lately have just been on a big kick for historical nonfiction. Not necessarily behavioral psychology, although I do appreciate a lot of those books as well. I wouldn't necessarily say this is my favorite, but since you're asking this question, I'll give you a recent one that I thought was particularly well done. And it's a book called Longitude. And I am blanking right now on the name of the author, but it is about how the challenge of measuring longitude in the 18th and 17th centuries was an incredibly challenging problem. Now we just open up our GPS and it tells you within a couple of feet where you are. And it's so easy. But when you are navigating a ship through the oceans and you have storms and tides, how challenging that was given the technology at the time. And so it's really exciting to see the ingenuity of people who weren't blessed with the level of technology and electronics that we have today, still have an amazing level of innovation and ingenuity in solving their problems. It's, you leave the book with that Isaac Newton quote in your head that if I've seen farther, it's only by standing upon the shoulders of giants. And it's such a delightful read.
Thank you for sharing that, Toastmaster Doug. Now, a food that is very close to your palate that you always like to have a bite of.
Oh man, there are so many. I'm not able to pan down, and so we're not able to see my pandemic punch right now. And so we know food is a big part of my life. I am a big fan of tacos, and I think I like to joke around that on some of our contestant profiles, I've said that tacos al pastor are the things that inspire me the most. And it's just a joke. And it's actually kind of a fun story about the history of tacos al pastor. It's actually a story of evolving traditions. And it's really interesting to hear that. But tacos are an absolute delight in my life. I encourage anyone who eats tacos at home to invest the $20 in a cast iron tortilla press and to go to your grocery store and buy a big bag of masa harina and start making your own tortillas at home. Once you recognize how easy they are to make and how much better they taste, you are never going back to store-bought tortillas ever again. I did this evangelization with the Somerville Toastmasters Club, and I tried to channel my inner Emeril Lagasse, Julia Child, Guy Fieri, whoever you want to call. And I did a live demonstration of making tortillas for one of my Toastmasters speeches. And so I would encourage the viewers of this show to go off and do the same.
Thank you for sharing that, Toastmaster Doug. A restaurant that you would like to visit with friends and family to have a good time?
I guess in the local area, here we are in Boston. I would say that for my wife and I, our absolute favorite place to go to is a place in Inman Square called Puritan and Company.
Okay.
It's our special occasion, birthday, anniversary. It's our go-to spot for that. The food is fantastic. I personally am a person who has celiac, and so gluten and gluten-free diets. Gluten-free diets are things that I need to be very cognizant of. And the staff and the chef there is very, very good with that. And so it's nice to be able to go to a place where they make you feel comfortable when you have food restrictions. And I don't know, if anyone wants to meet me there for a drink, I'll certainly meet them there because it's such a great place.
Thank you for sharing that, Toastmaster Doug. This wraps up our rapid fire round. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our District 31 audience?
Not at this point. No, well, I'll share this. I'm glad you're doing this, Vera. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for folks to get to know other people around the district, to build connections, and to give us a sense for what are the benefits of Toastmasters and how we each approach it in a different way. And so I guess my last thing that I'll say is thanks so much for doing this. We all appreciate it, and we all appreciate you and the contribution that you're making. These organizations that are built on volunteer labor are only as good as the volunteers themselves. And so I have high faith in the future of District 31 with a person like you helping to run things.
Thank you for your kind words. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you choose to come and talk to us. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Toastmaster.
Thank you, Vera.
Dear Toastmasters, that is a wrap on our wonderful episode of Open Heart with District 31. If you would like to come and talk to us, please do mention your name in our comment section. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until our next episode, bye-bye.